Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things. Today I'm going to be doing the New York Times by the book tag. I'm sure you have seen this tag going around a great deal on Booktube. It was created by Marie Berg, whose channel I will link down below, and I was tagged by Alicia from Ex Libris. Question 1. What book is on your bedside table right now? There are no books on my bedside table. In general, my books do not live on my bedside table because I do most of my reading not at night but on the way to work on the tube, so in general the books that I'm currently reading live in my bag. The two books that are currently in my bag are A Pair of Blue Eyes by Thomas Hardy, which I'm buddy reading with Alicia from Ex Libris and from Beyond the Pages, and Yamini from The Skeptical Reader, and also Other Stories and Other Stories by Ali Smith, which I have not started yet but is currently my backup book in case I finish A Pair of Blue Eyes. And I'm looking forward to it because I've still only read How to Be Both by Ali Smith, which I loved, and I'm very, very excited to read more by her. Question 2. What is the last truly great book that you read? Well, I'm currently rereading Our Mutual Friend for the Dickens along, and you know, Our Mutual Friend, it is my favourite book of all time. It is very, very great. If you would like to hear me tell you how great it is, I will link various videos down below where I talk about it at great length. This is a very good book. However, as I speak about that all the time, and as I'm currently rereading it, so technically it's not the last book I've read, I will tell you about another great book that I have read of late. In the month of May, I read Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which I would class as a truly great book. It is brilliant, the writing is wonderful, the plotting is done so well. The way this book carries on, the kind of solving of the mystery is just so good, and it's so creepy, and just your sympathies are thrown and torn in all kinds of directions in this book, and it's wonderful. It's so good. I'm really looking forward to reading Shirley Jackson more in the future because I think this is absolutely fantastic. Question 3. If you could meet any writer, dead or alive, who would you meet and what would you want to know? I don't think there's really any question for me there, is there? It would be Dickens. And not just because I want to meet Dickens, because I worship the ground he treads upon and I think all his books are wonderful. Because actually, I'm not sure that he was the nicest man who ever lived. I don't think he was horrible. I think he gets a bad rep. I don't think he was a completely nasty man, but I don't think he was necessarily the loveliest chap ever. I'm sure there would be writers who I would get on with more personally, for example, perhaps Jane Austen, but I really want to know what happens in the end of The Mystery of Edwin Drood. The Mystery of Edwin Drood is Dickens's unfinished novel that he was writing when he died, and it is of course a mystery, and it is perhaps a murder mystery, but we don't even know if it's a murder mystery because we don't know if there was actually a murder, and we just don't know anything. And although there is a commonly accepted solution, I don't think it would be that simple, because this is Dickens. That might be the solution, but there would be something a lot more complicated going on, because it's Dickens and his reveals are always incredibly complicated, often ridiculously so that no one would ever be able to work them out. And I have to know not just the mystery but also who ends up with who and what all the other stuff that's going to happen in the second half of the book that he never got to write. It really saddens me that that book is unfinished because it's so good. It's so good. It's brilliant. I genuinely think if he had finished it I might have loved it even more than Our Mutual Friend, and that is saying a lot. So there we go. I would meet Charles Dickens and I would ask him about The Mystery of Edwin Drood. I would make him tell me at great length what happens in the second half of the book. In fact, I might just make him sit there and write the second half of the book. That would be good. There we go. That's what I'd do. Question 4. What books might we be surprised to find on your shelves? I don't really feel like I have any surprising books because I read quite broadly anyway, so none of the books I really have would be likely to surprise you, I would say. However, I would say the most unlikely or unusual book for me that I have on my shelves is this, In the All-Night Cafe by Stuart David. This is a music memoir of Stuart David, who is one of the founding members of Belle and Sebastian, who are my favourite band. In general, most of the non-fiction I read would be history, and I don't read many music memoirs at all. This is the only one I've ever read, but I really enjoy this because they are my favourite band and it was fascinating hearing about how they formed. I think this is probably the book that is the most different from the other books that I have on my shelves, but yeah. Anyway, question 5. How do you organise your personal library? Let me show you. Everyman's Library Classics. Old books. Hardbacks. And notebooks. General fiction by author. Short stories by author. Plays by author. Poetry by author, non-fiction, mostly hidden behind books that I plan to read very soon. Books that I have borrowed from people and have yet to give back. Books that I intend on reading in the next month. Classics with not quite enough space to fit. General mess. Question 6. Which book have you always meant to read but never got round to? Anything you're embarrassed that you haven't read? As most people on Booktube seem to say for this question, there isn't anything I'm particularly embarrassed that I haven't read, although I feel like I should have read more Dickens non-fiction and more of his shorter works, considering how much I love his novels. I feel like there is actually quite a lot of his work that I haven't yet read. With Jane Austen, I've read all her novels, I've read the vast majority of her letters, I've read all of her juvenilia, I've read most of what she's written. But with Dickens, although I have read all of his novels and his body of work as a whole is probably 10 times as big as Jane Austen, there is still a lot of Dickens that I haven't read. Even though I've read all his novels, there are so many non-fiction pieces pieces and shorter works, so I feel like I really ought to have read more of them, and hopefully I will do in the future. In terms of books I've always meant to read but have never got around to, I think the books that have physically been on my bookshelves the longest, these ones have all been there like 6-7 years, would probably be The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, and The Odyssey and the Iliad by Homer. I've owned all of these quite a long time. Question 7. Disappointing, overrated, just not good. What book did you feel you were supposed to like but didn't? Do you remember the last book that you put down without finishing? I do not remember the last book that I put down without finishing. I don't in general DNF books, and I can't remember the last time I actively DNF'd a book. There is one short story collection which I'm still in the middle of and have been in the middle of for a while, but there aren't any books I've like purposefully put down without finishing. A book that I'm supposed to like but really didn't was One Day by David Nichols, and I've spoken about this before, but from the premise of it, it's just the kind of book I like. I enjoy love stories, I love books that have an interesting structure, I love books that span a really long period of time and dip in and out of people's lives in different ways. I love stories where the main character really likes books and likes writing, but I just really didn't like One Day. I really didn't like the ending, and I felt it was one of those love stories that really irritate me, where the two central characters are really well developed and all the background characters are just like fluff that only are there to serve plot points and have no personality, and it annoyed me. So there we go, that was a book I really felt like I should have liked and I really didn't. Question 8. What kind of stories are you drawn to? Any you steer clear of? I think there are a lot of different kinds of stories I'm drawn to. I'm obviously very interested in Victorian history and culture, so I'm very drawn to Victorian stories, both in terms of stories from the Victorian period, novels that were actually written then, and also books written today but set in the Victorian period. That's something I find really interesting. I'm also really drawn to books that have unreliable narrators or unusual narrative structures or multiple narrators, because these are just the kind of books I love. I love books and stories that play with form in interesting ways. I love stories about stories and stories about books and about people who love books. That's something that I really enjoy. I also love stories that either span a really, really long period of time or span like a short period of time. Like books that last like between a few months and like 2 years are just, they're like middle, whereas a book that lasts like just 24 hours or a book that lasts like 40 years. I love that. I love that. I like love stories where that isn't the main focal point of the book, and I also really like stories that in some way criticise society or examine like complicated themes going on in the world through their characters. In terms of things I steer clear of, I think it really varies. The only two genres I would say I never read are horror and erotica. I would say I read a little bit of everything else. In general, thrillers are not necessarily my thing, but I have read one or two that I enjoy. Question 9. If you could require the President or Prime Minister to read one book, what would it be? I would require David Cameron and whoever may so follow him in a few months to read The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling, partly because it is a very brilliant book, and also because it is a book that really, for me, sums up a lot of the big social issues that are going on in Britain. It is a social criticism novel, and they were massive in the 19th century, and we don't have that many anymore, and I think The Casual Vacancy is a very, very, very important book in terms of bringing to light certain problems within British society. I think it will be a very important book for anyone leading the country to read. And question 10 is, what do you plan to read next? I'm not entirely certain. It varies. I often have like a pile of books I want to probably get to in the month, and then I kind of pick what one depending on how I'm feeling and the time I have. But I would quite like to read The Miniaturist at some point soon, because I was going to read it back in May and then I didn't get around to it, and Olivia Pope was saying very good things about it, which makes me interested to read it. So I think I will be probably reading this next. Finally, I'm going to tag some people. A lot of people have done this tag, so I'm going to tag some newer people who I feel are less likely to have done it. So I'm going to tag my friend Jess from Good Kind of Madness, I'm going to tag Crystal Lynn, and I'm going to tag Amanda J. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video.